my project was achieving proficiency in math for deaf and hard of hearing students. My name's Elizabeth Minix. I teach in Breathitt County Schools for 23 years as a deaf and hard of hearing teacher. I've been in the PAN network since it started, and my first year was 5th grade. Taught regular ed, and then I've been in special ed ever since. So if they can't learn the way we teach the way they learn. And I just threw some sign language, 1 through 10 sign language for everybody to look at.
Do you need enough up there on it?
No, it's okay. If possible, start using math languages in problems from an early age so that children understanding can become deeply embedded. When I was doing this project, I was doing some research on some stuff, and I found this sign language dictionary that had all math terms, and it's Texas Math Sign Language Dictionary. And so you can click on any of them, and like, I just took a screenshot of me. So any math word, and it's got all grades, you can search and find the sign for if you have deaf and hard of hearing students in your class.
I need to remember that.
Here was one of the things I used for one of my students. Like one day we didn't have a number line ready, so I had a ruler laid there, and I was like, okay, so we utilized the ruler as our number line, and I just put a piece of paper behind it with his problem, and that way he could just use the ruler and count over for his number line, because he still struggles with, he's still having trouble getting the concepts of the adding, so we just do it visually with the ruler.
Rulers and tape measures are great because they are what I call low fret titles things, and they're everyday items that we can find.
Right, that's what I was trying to do. So this one was the base 10 worksheet he had to do, and I found these poppets on Amazon, and they love them. So whenever they're doing their blocks or the numbers, they just take 2 and match it up, and then he can feel and have all the tactile stuff to help him figure out his problems. But on one of my pictures, I saw he didn't count it correctly, so I wouldn't put that one on there. A big reason for the gap for the deaf and hard of hearing students is the spoken language and sign language. While not all deaf children communicate using sign language, the understanding of differences can help teachers make math lessons more accessible. It's important to remember that sign languages are different from English and lack of determiners. That's if they use ASL. Most of mine use the sign English where they do everything. I don't think I have any that actually does ASL, true ASL. So before and after math lessons, ask the deaf students a math question with a target language and practice answering it with them. This will give them extra exposure to the language of math. I don't know why I put math. I changed it, but it did. As they gain confidence, ask them to answer questions more independently. In word problems, teach the children to underline the key words and numbers and they will need to use so they can remember what they need to do. Which is kind of what doesn't go for just deaf children. It could go for any student struggling with math. As deaf children can't rely on what they hear, they use visuals becomes more necessary. Deaf children may focus on concrete materials a bit longer than hearing, using fingers, counters, and blocks, for example. Like other children, deaf children prefer to choose their own method to solve problems. There are a number of methods you can use: number line, column methods, drawing, counters, dots. Always have a whiteboard and a board pen to hand so they can practice. Usually when I go into the classroom, I take a little kit, and some days I don't know what they're actually working on, so I just bring everything. So I'll bring some blocks and my ruler and stuff, and I always have a whiteboard with me. And I have number lines made that are laminated so that we can use it for, but I usually just carry that all with me to class, and so I have everything with me whenever we're doing assignments. Some deaf children need to go at a slower pace. Due to their differing language levels, they may need more time to process information. You can give them more time to answer a question. One good technique is to ask the deaf child a question and then come back to them a couple minutes later for an answer. It's important that all children can explain how they solve the problem. This can be tricky for deaf children. Several ways: allow them to express their answer in any way they can. For example, they may want to write it out or draw each stage with their method. Have children explain what they did, model it, write it, and give them a word bank to choose from. It's important to remember that all deaf children are different. They have different hearing levels, different access to language, different language needs, and possibly other needs too. All these tips can be used to support children in developing their mathematical language, but always work with them to define what suits them best. Children who are deaf and hard of hearing can learn and do mathematical concepts in the same sequence and manner as their hearing peers. Most students who are deaf and hard of hearing have a gap of approximately 3 years behind their hearing peers in mathematics. A delay in language can make math challenging, especially the reading problems. They struggle sometimes on those. But most of my students, I'm fortunate, they pick up on math concepts very quickly. I can pretty much show them, and then they'll do it themselves. I mean, I have to say I'm lucky on that, that they pick up very quickly.
I am surprised about the gap of approximately 3 years. I mean, I can see that in reading and writing, but in mathematics, due to the fact that most kids, even kids who are deaf or hard of hearing, play with blocks, they play with cars,
What I have seen with my students since COVID hit, and they were at home, then my particulars, I had 2 students that actually did another year of virtual, and that made them more behind than they were before. I mean, it's like the basic, that student I was showing you on there, he's 4th grade. So he still has trouble just adding basic numbers. He's missed out on one. So he's even further behind this.
So maybe they're not playing with certain games or activities like we thought before.
Right.
Like they're not playing with the blocks, they're not building, they're not doing those kind of things.
Video games.
Well, I think that most students now, they're born on an iPad.
Yeah.
Or a computer, or handheld games. They're not getting
They're not getting the
the
manipulatives
stuff
and all this stuff.
we get as children.
So is that child also behind in like the picture grasp and the things like that they would need? For like typical writing and those kind of things?
Oh, yeah. His writing, yeah, very behind. And like I said, one of my students, he's very smart, but he can tell me how to spell the word, and when I say write red, he can say R-E-D. He cannot write it down.
Physically right.
He's like, how do I spell that?
So he has
like
a
you just
simple
told me.
connection.
Right.
Right.
I was like, you just told me, just write, and it's like, he don't even know what an R is. The computers and stuff has really affected my kids on that.
I can read the symbol, but I can't create the symbol.
Right.
Wow, what a
Yeah.
challenge. Okay.
And it's getting more prominent.
Children who are deaf and hard of hearing may lack general vocabulary and fundamental mathematical vocabulary needed to understand math concepts and processes. Hearing children are exposed to language from birth and have an understanding of everyday language. An example of this early exposure is students counting babies' fingers and toes or counting blocks while playing with toys. The first exposure serves as a base for developing understanding and use of mathematical language. The incidental learning, these kids miss out on so much of that. granted of what your hearing kids can hear. Oh, why don't you know that? Well, they missed out on it because, and then like most of my students, early intervention was not there. So they're lacking even more. By the time, like I had one student that he was totally deaf, but didn't get his cochlear implant until he's like 5 or 6 years old. So then he's that far behind on hearing stuff. Now, like his brother, he had hearing aids, but his hearing wasn't as severe, so he's pretty smart and he's picked up on, he's still lacking on some of the vocabulary. Like he'll say, like things that you would think he would know, you don't know what it's called. He's missed out on that.
They've missed out on that whole verbal connection that they need, right?
Right.
I mean, and that's scary because if you miss out on the verbal connection and you created something in your mind, let's think about it, that's probably not what we're actually calling it. So now you've got a complete miscommunication. Wow.
Problem solving is difficult for children who are different in hearing. Problem solving requires the child to predict and make observations based on given information, which requires strong language skills and ability to critically think. Communication with others may be difficult. Suppose the child and others in the environment cannot communicate effectively. In that case, they may not be able to engage mathematical processes such as problem solving, develop logic, reasoning, effectively communicating mathematical ideas. Without effective communication skills, the child can be isolated in the learning environment and unable to participate in a group and activities. But I would have to say the child that was in the picture, he's in 4th grade, and the teachers do really good at communicating with him and including him on everything, and they do a really good job. It is more difficult for children who are different in hearing to acquire language and learning from their environment incidentally. Overhearing conversations, others in the environment, and on TV and radio. Without this incidental learning, a child who is deaf may not develop even the beginning math concepts such as big and little, or heavy and light, without being formally taught them.
And above and below.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, okay.
You can skip that. So, I also found this media, it had the signs for another math thing, like degree of an angle. I know some of my teachers, so I'm gonna share that with them so they can look at it. And I didn't know it was there. This project is what helped me find some of these things.
That's awesome though.
That's the,
Do you want me to click on it?
that's the other one I think I missed. And here's another one. This is a STEM sign language video, and it has more in-depth signs, and it's got A through Z of signs for STEM. And there's my resource.